She was not supposed to be there. That is the singular truth upon which this entire catastrophe rests, a truth as cold and immovable as the marble floors of Ashbourne Manor, as unforgiving as the winter wind that howled through its ancient corridors on that terrible December evening. Miss Elara Voss was not supposed to be in the Duke's private library at 11:30. She was not supposed to have crept down the east staircase, candle trembling in her gloved hand, searching for the volume of Keats she had carelessly left behind during the afternoon's literary gathering. She was not supposed to see anything at all. And yet she saw everything. The library of Ashbourne Manor was the kind of room that swallowed a person whole. Floor-to-ceiling shelves of leather-bound volumes lined every wall, their spines gleaming faintly in the amber light. The hearth, enormous and ancient, crackled with a fire that cast long, dancing shadows across the Persian rug. The cold draught that crept beneath the heavy oak doors kissed Elara's ankles through the thin silk of her evening slippers, and she had just wrapped her fingers around the spine of her beloved Keats when the sound of the side door's latch stopped her breath entirely. She pressed herself behind the great velvet curtain beside the window, an instinct more than a decision, and through the narrow gap between the curtain's heavy folds, she watched. His Grace, Evander Ashbourne, the 8th Duke of Ashbourne, entered the library with the measured, deliberate stride of a man accustomed to owning every room he occupied. He was tall, unreasonably so, with dark hair that fell slightly across his brow and shoulders that filled the doorframe with an authority that seemed almost architectural. Elara had met him only twice before during her stay as the companion of his younger sister, Lady Cecily. Both encounters had been brief, formal, and charged with the peculiar tension of a man who chose his words the way a general chose his battles, sparingly and with devastating precision. But tonight, the Duke was not alone. Behind him entered a man Elara did not recognize, stout, ruddy-faced, with the nervous energy of someone wholly unaccustomed to the grandeur surrounding him. He clutched a leather satchel to his chest as though it contained his very soul. "You will sign it," the stranger said, his voice low but trembling at its edges. "You promised me, Your Grace, the deed, the money, all of it. You promised." The Duke moved to the great writing desk without a word, drew open the topmost drawer, and removed a folded document. He held it in the firelight for a moment, studying it with those impenetrable grey eyes. "I promised," he said, his voice smooth as polished obsidian, "that the matter would be resolved. I did not promise it would be resolved in your favour." And then, with a composure so absolute it was itself a form of violence, he fed the document to the fire. The stranger let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. "You cannot! You cannot!" "I just did," the Duke said quietly. "The arrangement, as you call it, never existed. You would be wise to remember that, and wiser still to never speak of it again." Behind the curtain, Elara's heart hammered against her ribs with such ferocity she was convinced the entire room could hear it. The curtain was pulled back, and the Duke of Ashbourne looked directly at her. For a long moment, perhaps the longest of Elara's 23 years on this earth, neither of them breathed. His grey eyes moved from her flushed countenance to the fallen book, to the candle still clutched in her shaking hand, and back again. Something shifted in his expression. Not guilt. No, guilt was far too pedestrian a thing for a man like Evander Ashbourne. It was something more complex, more dangerous. It was calculation. "Miss Voss," he said at last, with the same infuriating composure. "How remarkably inconvenient." If you're as captivated by this story as I believe you are, if your heart is hammering alongside Elara's right now, then please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the Duke's Lost Letters. Your support is the reason these stories exist, and every single like and subscription tells me to keep writing. Now, back to Elara and the impossible situation she now finds herself in. The stranger fled. Elara heard the side door slam with a finality that seemed to seal her fate within these four walls. And then there was only the firelight and the Duke, and the silence between them, thick as brocade. "How much did you hear?" he asked. His tone was not threatening. That, somehow, made it more frightening. Elara lifted her chin, because she had learned early in life that a lifted chin could substitute, at least briefly, for actual courage. "Enough," she said. "I heard enough, Your Grace." He studied her with the same unsettling thoroughness with which he had studied the document before destroying it. "You are my sister's companion, a woman of modest means, no family of consequence, and no particular social standing to speak of." He paused, as though allowing time to absorb the cruelty of the inventory. "And yet you stand before me with the bearing of someone who believes herself to hold the upper hand." "I hold nothing," Elara said, her voice steadier than she deserved, "except the memory of what I witnessed. Whether that constitutes an upper hand, Your Grace, is entirely a matter of your own conscience." Something moved behind his eyes, the briefest flicker of something she could not name. "My conscience," he said softly, almost to himself, "is a vastly overestimated faculty." He moved to the fireplace, resting one hand upon the mantelpiece, and stared into the flames for a long moment. When he turned back, his expression had resolved itself into something final. "There is, as I see it, only one remedy to this situation, Miss Voss, one arrangement that protects us both."
"I cannot imagine what arrangement you mean." "Can you not?" He crossed the room slowly, stopping at a distance just close enough to be improper and just far enough to remain, technically, within the bounds of decorum. His voice dropped to something barely above a whisper, low and deliberate and devastating. "You will be my betrothed. You will accept my proposal of marriage, and in doing so, you will become a woman whose word, should she ever choose to speak against me, is immediately and irrevocably entangled with my own ruin, and therefore her own." The silence that followed was so complete that Elara could hear the snow beginning to fall beyond the darkened windows. "That is," she said at last, "the most monstrous thing anyone has ever said to me." "Yes," he agreed, without a trace of apology. "I expect it is." She hated him in that moment, hated the architecture of his face, the measured quiet of his voice, the way the firelight seemed to conspire with him, illuminating the sharp line of his jaw and the gray of his eyes, until he appeared less like a man and more like the portrait of one, beautiful, untouchable, and utterly without warmth. And yet, Elara Voss had always possessed a quality that her mother had called stubbornness and her heart had always called survival. She looked at the Duke of Ashbourne, this cold, calculating, impossible man, and she thought of the life she had led until this moment, a life of quiet dependence, of grateful invisibility, of existing always at the edges of other people's grandeur. She thought of what it might mean for a woman of her station to become a duchess, the power of it, the shelter of it, and she thought with a clarity that frightened her that she had not yet decided whether she despised him or whether she was, God help her, desperately, ruinously fascinated by him. "Very well," she said at last. The Duke blinked. It was, she noted, with a small, fierce satisfaction, the first unguarded thing she had seen him do. "Very well," he repeated. "I will accept your proposal," she said, her voice steady as stone. "But understand me, your grace, I accept it on my own terms, not yours. And whatever secret you believe you have buried tonight in that fire, I promise you this, I am a far more dangerous keeper of secrets than you have bargained for." For a long moment, Evander Ashbourne simply looked at her, and then, slowly, irresistibly, like the first crack appearing in a great sheet of winter ice, something that might, in another man, have been called a smile crossed his lips. "Miss Voss," he said quietly, "I do believe you are the most extraordinary inconvenience I have ever encountered." And Elara Voss, heart hammering, candle still trembling in her hand, standing in the cold draught of a library that smelled of old books and wood smoke and danger, thought that perhaps, just perhaps, this was only the beginning. Outside the manor, the snow fell soft and silent over Ashbourne's vast grounds, burying the footprints of the man who had fled, erasing the evidence of the evening as though it had never occurred. But some things, once witnessed, can never be unseen. Some arrangements, once spoken aloud, take on a life of their own. And some inconveniences, the most extraordinary ones, have a way of becoming, against all reason and propriety, entirely indispensable.